I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You're the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. Great to have you. And, you know, when we go through difficult things in life, and I don't just mean, you know, trying to pay the bills or get all the kids to school on time. I'm talking about the hard things, the devastating things. It can change us, and not always for the better. How do we come out of dark times stronger, intact, maybe? But also with a stronger relationship with the Lord. Because I think, well, we'll get into some of the theology and the ideas behind it, but I want to introduce you to someone today who has a book available now. It's called Learning to Dance in the Darkness. Looks just like this, and it's written by Stewart, Bogle, and he joins us to tell us some of his story, as much as we can get in a short program. But I think you're going to be encouraged if you're in a dark time. I want you to know that you're not alone in the struggle that you're in, if you're in a deep, dark place. And I want you to know that there's hope. And so from Adelaide, Australia, welcome, Stewart, to Life Today Live.
Thanks very much, Randy. It's great to be here.
So I teased a little bit of this, and now people are wondering, okay, what's going on here? You picked a point in which you want to go back, because I know there's a lot of things you've been through. But walk us through some of the difficulties that you had to learn to dance in. You had to make that choice.
Well, as you said, it's quite the story. So where to begin? Look, I think for me, I knew the principles that many people suffer. They go through things, and I'd watched as I became a Christian at 18, and I had my life set before me. I was going to serve God. I was going to go to the outermost parts of the world and reach the lost and share the gospel. And so I trained and I prepared, and I was really excited about life and where it was heading. And I ended up taking a role as a principal of a Bible school in New South Wales. And I had students come from all over the world. It was actually the place where I was saved at a summer conference. And so life was really good, and I was looking ahead to where we were going to go, and I was dreaming. And then one day, my wife walked through the front door, and I saw a look on her face that told me that our lives were going to change forever. She'd just been to the doctor. We'd been getting a lump in her breast looked at for some months, and the doctor kept reassuring us it was just a blocked milk duct because we had a young baby, and it was all going to be fine. And on this day, it wasn't fine, and they realized it was breast cancer. And so I can mark the moment where the plans that I had for life just turned upside down completely. And so we went through a really difficult few years of hoping and praying and assembling a vast army of people all over the world to pray for a miracle, because we believe in a miracle working God. But it didn't work out. And so my wife died, and I was on my own with 3 young children in a completely different path that I thought I was going to be on. So that was the beginning.
So I have a question, because, you know, I have had a younger sister, fought cancer for 7 years, passed away at the age of 40. She had 3 young children at home as well. And, you know, same thing, army of people praying, you know, we're believing for healing, you know, and I want to do that. I will continue to do that defiantly. But what do you do when the prayer is not answered, obviously, in the way you want? Because that can wreck your theology. It can at least make you not understand what God's doing, and sometimes you can actually blame God. How did you process that?
Yeah, I think that's the whole basis of why I wrote the book, because the subtitle of the book is Wrestling with God in the Darkest of Times. Mm-hmm. And that's what we end up doing. We wrestle. And if we've got our theology wrong, it can come undone for us. And we can turn away from God at the time we need him rather than turn to him. And so that's become my thesis, is that there is, and I experienced this as a Christian school teacher for a long time. I watched these strong Christian families who would go through a divorce or a serious illness or a death in the family. And some would turn to God in faith and continue to trust him, even though things weren't working out. And others would shake their fist at him and say, I've had enough. What sort of God are you? And I think that's the path. That's the juncture people face when tragedy strikes. And they've got to work out their theology beforehand, because it's very difficult to work it out in the middle of the storm. Yeah. So I really encourage people to say, what is it that you believe about God? Is it a God that is going to step in and fix everything? Or is it a God that is never going to leave you or forsake you, and he will be present and bring comfort and peace? Now, Randy, of course, all of us want that all-powerful God who steps in and fixes everything, but it just doesn't work out that way. And you've got to work out what you're going to do at that point. And I made the decision, not once, not twice, but over and over again, as I went through a series of catastrophic traumas beyond just my wife dying of cancer, that I was going to continue to turn to God, even though I couldn't understand why he wasn't stepping in and doing the miracle.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of those, but quickly, not so quickly, as much time as we need, because this is important. The thing that I have to anchor to, and it's not always easy, but I believe that it's a foundational belief and truth, whether I believe it or not, and that is that God is a good God. And when we're touched by pain or evil, that can be hard to keep a focus on, but I think it's the anchor. How much did that play a role in your ability to get through these things?
That's a really good point, because early on I noticed that I was running a Bible school, so I had people from everywhere, and they would come to me to try to bring comfort. And I'd find this phrase they'd use. They'd say to me, often a little too loudly, they'd say, "Stewart, God is good." And I remember hearing that over and over again. It was like, I know he's good. And a young girl from Canada came to my door, and she had tears in her eyes, and she got her fists and put them in front of me, and she said very loudly, "Stewart, God is good." And I don't know why I did this, but I gently took her fists and I pulled them apart a little bit, and I said, "I know he's good. He's just a little difficult to work with at times." And I didn't mean that irreverently,
right?
But I wanted to say, this isn't in question. God is a good God.
Yeah.
Sometimes the things that are happening to us don't feel like they're the work of a good God, and we have to wrestle with that. But I didn't doubt it for a moment that God was good. And so I actually found my comfort in Jesus, because I came to that point of reading about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, who was about to go through a horrendous thing. Mm-hmm. And he cried out to his Father, and he said, "I don't want to go through this. Please, please spare me. Yet not my will, yours be done." And that became my prayer under the stars every night. God, please spare my kids the pain of losing their mum. Spare my beautiful wife the pain she's going through. Spare us all. Yet if for some reason that's not going to happen, let your will be done, and give us strength and courage. But we didn't doubt the goodness of God, but I can see why people do. They go, how does an all-powerful, all-loving, good God allow this stuff?
Yeah, I get it. I've asked the question myself. But again, it's the anchor. I think you almost have to resolve that before you're going to be able to move on and even cope with these things, and not just live stuck like that. I'm also curious how the loss of a loved wife and mother like that changed your perspective on this life. Were you thrust into a more eternal perspective, if not immediately, at least over time?
Yeah, look, one of the things that cancer does, the journey of cancer allows, is a lot of those discussions. And so at night time, my wife and I would sit down, and I was desperate to not lose her. And she was desperate to stay as well. And all those things that a mother wants, to be there for a daughter and to see her baby become, a man. But she was actually really comfortable about the fact that if this was going to be her lot in life, she was going to be with the Lord. Mm. And I remember thinking that, I came up with a whole lot of titles for books, didn't have much content, but I had a lot of titles. And one of them was going to be, "This life is not as good as it gets." Because if we believe that, as Paul said, that to live is Christ, but to die is gain, then there's something about the afterlife that's really, really special and something we look to. But I think we've actually got a theology. This is a generalization. We've got a theology that says it's like a nursing home up there. So we've got to make the most of this life, because it's going to be a long time of just sitting around singing Kumbaya in a cloud. And I think that's wrong. I think we've got to go, this is just a shadow of things to come. This life, there's so many amazing things about this life, but if we put everything into this life, we are not going to understand the eternity that comes with faith in God. So I have a great hope that my wife is there in heaven. And I lost my son-in-law to cancer only a year or so ago. And we have this great belief that he's there as well. And so I do have a different perspective. I didn't focus on what was to come. I was always focusing on the here and the now. And I know that's important, but it's also a comfort to know that there is an eternal life with God beyond this life.
Yeah, I understand it. But, we're coming out of our winter here. You're coming out of your summer. But, my wife is from Florida, and she's a warm weather creature. And she hates, we had sub-zero temperatures for several days a few weeks ago. And she was just like, I hate it. I'm like, honey, it's going to be in Fahrenheit, it's going to be 100 degrees here in a few months. So, I mean, just you got that coming. So just, deal with the day. And I think sometimes we're like that. We're like, man, it's cold, it's gray, everything's dead, nothing's there. It's like, nah, there are seasons to this. And this life that we have is a season. You mentioned some of the other difficulties you've been through. And I know you talk about, there's so many things in the book. What are some of the other things where the faith that you had to cling to and really kind of mature going through the situations with your wife, they were tested again later?
Yeah, they were. This is where my theology was tested as well, because I think there was something unspoken in the back of my mind that said, if I handle this well, the sickness of my wife, the journey of cancer, if I handle it well, then somehow I'll be rewarded for that. And I never spoke that. I would never have told you I thought that, but it was there. And so things continued to be really difficult, and it was a constant battle because it didn't work out that way. I went through, and I won't be able to go into all the detail, but we had so many things go wrong. My own cancer battle. I had a bicycle accident where I was hit by a car and I was driven headfirst into a tree, which gave me a catastrophic brain injury, which means I can't work full time now. I have symptoms that remain with me. One day when the doctors told me you need to reduce the stress in your life because of this brain injury, I woke up and the house was on fire. We'd got a electrical fault into the ceiling and the roof was just bouncing because of the fire. And it collapsed onto my children's bed, who only just got out of the house minutes before. My eldest son, who's just a most incredible young man, was arrested for a bushfire that he lit because he was trying to romance his now wife Valentine's Day, and a little bit of flame escaped and it lit up half of Adelaide with this huge fire. And because of that and a change in the law, he was facing going to jail. Now, this was over and over again. We faced things. I remarried what I thought was going to be the most beautiful time of my life, and we faced another unbelievable challenge with a mental health issue that rose, and we went through years of trying to address that, and it became it's hard to explain, and I have to be careful what I talk about, but it was just another thing where that marriage ended because of safety issues and health issues for my wife. And so I've kept facing time and time again new challenges, and each time I face the same challenge. Where are you, God, and what are you doing? And that's the faith journey of trusting that God was right there, that none of this was a surprise to him. But things kept coming. And then when you think things are working out, my daughter, who'd been through so much from a young girl onwards, she married the love of her life. And he was diagnosed with cancer. And so they fought that. They finally got married. And then he dies. 3 months after we're at the wedding, he dies. And I sit in the hospice with him and my daughter watching, going, this is relentless. And so I've wrote the book called Learning to Dance in the Darkness, because sometimes you walk through, and you mentioned it before, seasons of darkness. Somebody said to me, it's just a season, Stewart, you'll get through it. And I said, it's starting to feel more like a lifestyle. But we have a choice at that point. Do we keep going or do we turn away? And sometimes I think, Randy, we've got an invisible tolerance line that we put in place for an all-powerful God, and we say, hey, we're happy to follow you up to this point, but you cross that line and we're done. And I think that's the challenge for many people, is they maybe can get through one thing, but life's full of more than one thing, whether to us, to those we love, or those around us. And we make a choice at that time.
Yeah, it's kind of like you live in far north Finland, where the winters are very, very long and the summers brief. It's difficult. So this is the book that Stewart just mentioned, Learning to Dance in the Darkness. And I'm curious, what is, for you, what is the dance? What does it look like?
Well, it's great because it's not a triumphal dance where I'm just bouncing around doing the tango. Sometimes it's a shuffle. For me, it was a metaphor of I'm just going to continue to turn up to God. And I'm going to continue to keep staying on the journey that I committed to when I was 18, that I'm going to follow you no matter what. Now, to be honest, I had no idea what the no matter whats were going to be, but that was the deal. And he said to me, I'll love you always, and I'm never going to leave you or forsake you. So keep walking. And I've continued to call it a dance, but it's just that walking in faith. And I don't ever want to put a spin on this, but there is so much joy in this life as well through the darkness. And even though I don't want people listening to think, oh, it's just been a miserable life, there's been a lot of joy, a lot of things I'm thankful for. It's just different to what I'd expected, different to what I'd planned, but that's the nature of life too. We get to control some things, but a lot of things come at us, and we've got to decide what we're going to do when they come at us.
Well, yeah, and different from what you would choose, I would think,
Absolutely.
Nobody would choose these things. But I think the idea of dancing or continuing to walk, continuing to hold to your faith, even when it just doesn't make sense, it goes back to the choice. And some people, I think, deny even their own ability to choose. And I get it. Sometimes you want to, but it's hard to. And that's where I think, drawing close to Christ, he helps. But how much of it was actually a choice you had to make, even when it wasn't easy?
Yeah, look, it was a choice, and it continued to be a choice. And there were times when I felt upset, I felt angry with God. But I came to understand that God was big enough to handle my emotions. Sometimes we suppress those things, but God knows us from the inside out. And so it's better to be honest with God. But it was a choice. Sometimes you actually had to rely on the faith of others who were praying for us and were holding us up. And it wasn't just, otherwise it becomes a performance of how much can I generate faith? How much can I generate peace? How much can I, well, you actually can't sometimes. So sometimes you just fall in the arms of God and say, I don't know what to do, but I'm just going to trust you. And he gets you through that moment. He gets you through that day. And then you can look back and you go, I can see you through that. What I don't want to do though, Randy, is put a spin on this, do acrobatics to absolve God of responsibility and say, oh, he did this and now I'm a much better preacher, or he did this and now I've remarried and got a new wife. I'm not trying to do that. I want to try to say, I don't get it. This isn't the way I would have designed life if I was God, but I'm not God. And I've chosen to trust God. And people do say to me, I bet when you get to heaven, Stuart, you're going to line up and be the first one to say, what was that all about? And I go, I'm not going to do that. And it's not because I'm particularly spiritual. It's because I decided I wanted to follow a God who is God. And I don't want a God who has to go, oh, this is what was happening. I want to explain it all to you. This is what I was doing, so that I can be satisfied and go, oh, now that makes sense, God. I just want to trust God and say, you're God, I'm not. I'm choosing to follow you. And that's been my pattern. It's become my habit, and it's carried me through the darkest of times.
You're not alone in that. Your story and your choice, your attitude, reminds me of one of my favorite Psalms. It's only 6 verses long. It's Psalm 13. It says, it's David saying, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? And I know we feel like that. How long will you hide your face from me? We wonder where God is in the midst of all this. How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. Because I get it, sometimes you just don't feel like even getting out of bed, much less living. Yeah. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. And here's that thing. Here's that dancing in the dark. And this is the beauty of the will that God has given us. But this is the point that people, I think, they have to understand that it's there and they can do this. And it's one word says, but. So you got all this, and then, but I trust in your unfailing love, what you just said, to trust in God. My heart rejoices in your salvation, dances in the dark, right? I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Is that you?
Well, that's what I aspire to be. I've been honest with God, but I also go, but I trust you. I believe that you have never left me or forsaken me. I believe there's no plan B in life. You knew from the beginning to the end. And so you've walked me through this. You've helped my kids who have amazing kids growing into faithful young men and women of God. I go, there's a lot to be thankful to God for, but let's not pretend that there's pain in this life too. And we're confused sometimes.
Yeah.
That's what the psalmist, I turn to the Psalms a lot, Randy, because I go, there's honesty there. There's lament in the scriptures that say, I don't get this. I'm hurting so badly, yet will I trust in you.
And that's, I mean, literally 2/3 of that, the way it's divided. 2/3 is complaining, God, where are you? 1/3 is okay, here's the choice I'm going to make. And it feels like that sometimes. It feels like the overwhelming is the pain and the grief and the confusion and not understanding. What do you experience? I mean, have you felt, God's presence in any kind of way through other people, or just a peace in you? What have you? What could you point to in your own life to say God was faithful and continues to be faithful?
I could write a whole new book on the things, the points in my life. But there was a moment I'll share where I remember we just got some really terrible news that, barring a bona fide miracle from God, my wife was going to go to be with the Lord, and I was going to be on my own with the 3 kids. And I was just out the backyard, and I was literally sobbing. I just was like, I just don't know what this future is going to be like. And I remember looking up through tears going, where are you, God? And I wanted a hug. I wanted a voice. I wanted something. And then this thought came to me, and I'm sure it was God. God has been all around me. He'd turned up. He was a God with skin on through the people that turned up at my door, the practical things that were being done, the kindnesses, the financial support, the practical support. And I go, when I ask, where are you, God? It was almost like he was crying back, I'm everywhere. And so we experienced so many moments of grace, so many moments of comfort. I remember sitting there with my son, a young lad, as he walked in as my wife was dying. And I said, Josh, you don't want to be here? And he goes, yeah, I do, Dad. And he sat down and he held her hand. And then I asked him what he wanted did he want to say anything? And he wanted to read Psalm 100 about entering the courts with thanksgiving. And as she passed away, and I said to him, Josh, Mum's with Jesus now. He'll take good care of her. We walked out and I put my arm, I said, are you okay? And he said, Dad, I felt a peace. Now that's a supernatural thing. He wasn't happy, but he felt a peace that carried him through what was an incredible moment for a young child to experience. So we've had so many of those experiences, and I'm learning through the work I'm doing now that I'm not alone in that either. God keeps turning up for people in amazing ways. Not always the way we want him to turn up, but he turns up in ways that carry us through these dark times.
Yeah, and the idea of walking through these things together, I think, is a powerful one, and just encouraging each other, sharing with each other, and I think that's a really cool ministry. As a matter of fact, I want to show people your website. This is resilientsouls.com.au. And explain a little bit of what exactly this is.
Let me just explain where that came from, because just when it came to the end of my wife's life, I remember one of my friends said to me, are you okay? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, what's troubling you the most? I said, we know where Heather's going. It's more about the kids and what this is going to do to their faith. And he said, oh, you don't need to worry about your kids. He said, they're developing muscular souls. And I loved that word. All of us know about going to the gym and how you got to work that muscle. And I went, well, that's true. And so I thought about starting something called Muscular Souls. And I thought, no, that sounds like a new age gym for Christian men. But so I called it Resilient Souls, because that's what's needed, is a resilience in your faith as you go through these tough times that can weather the storms. And so I thought at one stage I'd written my book, and I thought, well, I want to share that. But then I realized that's just my perspective. That's just my experience, my view of God, my personality. And that may encourage some people. But what about many, many other people who are learning to dance in the darkness of their own experiences? So I set this up. I felt God clearly say to me, step down from the work you're doing. I want you to create a community where people can find encouragement to realize they're not alone, can pick up some practical tips of what to do in the darkest moments, how do people turn to God, not from him, but also to help others to go, I don't know how to help my friend that's just got this terrible diagnosis. I don't know how to help my sister whose child has just, died. All of those things that we go through, and there's people who are sharing real stories about what helped them, what didn't help them, what were the things that came out that we can share as principles for others. So I didn't want to waste the pain of my own experience. And so I've turned that into something where I hope will encourage and support others through what they're going through.
There's a couple things you mentioned there. One, your story, other stories, and then community. And I think sometimes we downplay, at least in our culture, Americans, we're all independent, kind of, yada, yada. And God's like, no, community is the way. And then, sometimes we hear these tremendous testimonies and you think, I don't really have a story. What are you saying about the power of story in community?
So when I have this great belief too, when Jesus wanted to change lives, he told stories. And so the power of storytelling is absolutely critical, but it's not just telling the story of this is what's happened and I'm sitting in this pain. It's actually the story of how did that narrative shift to go, I am going to choose to follow God, not get angry with God. I am going to choose to get myself up in the morning when I feel like just lying in bed all day. So story is critical, but it's about writing a new chapter in people's lives. It's the same story, it's just a different chapter. And so when we hear from others, there's so much power in it. And what's coming out is so many principles around do not isolate yourself. Do not hide what you're going through. Do not bury it because it will come out. And so it's shining a light on those things, but doing it in a safe environment. And that's what Resilient Souls is about. That's what so many other organizations that are doing great work is to encourage people to open up, to share, to realize you're not alone. There is a way through, to not lose yourself, to not lose your way or your faith in God. And so I'm so privileged to be able to share the stories and amplify the voices of others who come on and say, it didn't work out the way I wanted. This wasn't the plan I had, but I am choosing that psalm. I am choosing to say, but I am going to trust you. And that's been a great encouragement to many, and it's been enriching for my soul. Just beautiful to meet people that know what it is to dance in the darkness, to wrestle with God, and to move forward.
So for anyone watching, and they're listening to this, and they're thinking, that's really great. He's got a great attitude, and I commend him and all that, but I don't know that I can ever dance. What encouragement or hope would you give them today?
I'd say redefine what they understand by dance. There's this understanding of rejoicing in the Lord, because this is where it all began for me, was in Philippians 4, rejoicing in the Lord. I'd just been preaching on it, and I was preaching this great message. The principles was terrific, but I hadn't lived it in practice. And then I got home and I got the news about my wife. And so I thought, how do I rejoice? I'm not happy at all. I'm utterly miserable at this news. So I thought, this has got to be different than happiness. So I began to look up every scripture I could on rejoicing, and I realized that it's not happiness. It's possible to rejoice and still be flooded with tears and pain. Rejoicing is an inner disposition of the soul that's not dependent on circumstances, because circumstances can change in a moment. Yeah. So I'd say to people, your feelings are natural and real, and this isn't a triumphal dance. Like I said before, it can be a shuffle. It's just keep going to God. Don't make the choice to turn away from God because of your pain, because of your emotions, which are natural. Turn to God, because otherwise you're going to face exactly the same things, but on your own, without the comfort, without the peace, without the hope that God brings. And so I'd say, try not to wrestle down the emotions you're feeling, validate them, recognize these are natural and real. You don't have to put on the happy face. Yeah. It's being honest with God, honest with each other, and then find some people that can help you to do that dance of just turning up to God.
I love it. Love it. It's so true. And I love the fact that you're raw and authentic, but yet you've made that choice, and it is dark, but you are dancing, and keep dancing, sir. Thank you. Appreciate you today.
Thanks so much for having me. Bless you.
Appreciate all you guys out there. Again, you can follow up with Stewart at resilientsouls.com.au, which the Australian designation on the internet stuff for all you Americans who are like, I don't know what that means. Just trust me on that one. Type it in, and you can pick up the book, Learning to Dance in the Dark, wherever you get books. Appreciate you guys being here. Look, if you're going through something you don't know where to start, maybe just crack open a Bible, find a Bible or an app online, and read through some of the Psalms and ask God just to show up for you. But if you want to encourage someone else, hit that share button. We appreciate you guys being here. We'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.